Now, PEG led the campaign in 2005, and we had a reinstated ban for 5 years. We really need to keep that ban in place. It can be a science test case, that's fine. Tasmania has discrete borders, and we can show them that we don't need GMO. So, thanks PEG, former leader of the Tasmanian Greens and CEO for Markets for Change.
And still unable to adjust the microphone. Yay, how about that? I think I can manage that one. The thing is, I need glasses these days to read what I'm going to say, but I need to look at you, so it's going to be a bit interesting. Okay, so the rallies against Monsanto, and I guess, you know, as an overarching comment, I'd say that large agricultural companies perpetrate a variety of ills, contaminating people and water and the environment and so on, and have been trusted by governments and farmers for decades as a source of advice and innovation. Yet, since the alarm bells began ringing in the 1960s with Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, they've retained their stranglehold on agricultural production and on the policies of governments. And Monsanto would be probably the most foremost example of this. I wanted to talk particularly about genetically engineered crops, also known as genetically modified organisms. And I always have chosen to call it genetically engineered because it much more precisely explains what's going on. The proponents of genetically engineered material like to call it genetically modified because it sounds a whole lot less like what it really is. It sounds much more like just ordinary crop breeding when that's not the case at all. So in the summer of 98, 99, I was sitting on the deck thinking, phew, a bit of a break from Parliament. And I picked up a copy of the Guardian Weekly and saw that all this stuff was just going off in the UK and Europe about genetically engineered crops. And I thought to myself, what on earth is this? Sounds like something we need to know about in Tasmania, especially because we think we're heading in a clean green direction, and this sounds like something that might not be that. Consumers were in revolt, and supermarkets had begun to drop GE foods and were now competing with each other to be more pure. So I went to the UK to have a look, and I visited just about everybody you could imagine. I started off with Sainsbury's, the supermarket chain, with their chief buyer, who told me about how they'd made the dreadful mistake of assuming that people would think that scientific advances were so great that it would be a fantastic idea to advertise that they had filled up the shelves with a new line of tomatoes that were full of fish genes. Interestingly, the public just went, "You what?" And there was this massive revulsion, helped along by a couple of environmental groups, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, collaborating, spreading out to people the consumer hotline for the company. Within days, their phone lines melted down on the consumer feedback. They completely reversed their policy. They announced that they would not have any genetically engineered material in any of their food lines whatsoever. And they set up, together with some of the other supermarkets, a product testing unit to check up on the claims that people supplying the food to them were making, because they knew they couldn't trust the companies and they couldn't trust that the food had not become contaminated in some way, and they would need to check it for themselves. So I learnt from that supermarket chain all about how the consumer rules, something that I've since been using at Markets for Change, and also about how there had been this mistaken idea that people would love to have their food stuffed around with by chemical companies. I also went and saw organic farms, conventional farmers, the Consumers Association, and so on and so on. In fact, the organic farm I went to look at was Prince Charles's farm, which was quite an interesting little excursion. But also there were established organisations like the British Medical Association raising concerns. So this wasn't just something that, you know, a few fringe people or a few uninformed consumers, in fact a lot of potentially not scientifically literate consumers were saying was a problem. Even the British Medical Association was really concerned. And that was because of the potential and even probable health risks associated with genetically engineered food. So what were and are the problems? Well, there are a huge number of them and I can't really go through them all. But basically there's the imprecise nature of achieving genetic modification through this sort of engineering, firing genes from something else into the DNA of another plant or being, and using a vector which in itself was thought to be harmful to do that. So there was a harmful material associated with just getting the new genetic material in, and there was the harm associated with the random process of where it might end up and what it might actually do through the organism on top of what anybody thought it was going to do to the particular characteristics of that food. Then there was the business of making plants poisonous to pests, putting genes in there, material in there to make plants actually poisonous to insects, for example, and the serious question of the impact of such chemicals on human guts and the human health. Then there's the impact on the environment, making plants tolerant of poisons such as Roundup Ready canola and other things, other ones that are okay for the triazine herbicides, so that those crops could be hosed in sprays and withstand it. Obviously a massive impact on the environment if you do that, but also then you've got to think about people eating the crops that are produced by hosing these crops with sprays, you know, at a sort of an incredible rate. Then again, in relation to the environment, there's the potential of changed genetic lines to escape into the environment and interbreed with wild plants or other non-GE crops. So that can affect the environment, and of course it can affect other farmers. Essentially, once GE crops are introduced into the environment, there is no safe and completely secure separation. Not that there was any such genetically engineered plant available, but they wanted the option. Another one at the time was genetically engineered clover for dairy, and I've read since that more recently, with the expansion of dairy in Tasmania, there is talk from the agricultural sector about introducing genetically engineered grasses to Tasmania. The idea is horrific. Talk about escape through the environment. That's, you know, about as uncontrollable as you can imagine. So that I think that is potentially some sort of very real threat. And then there is the push that's coming from America, from the companies like Monsanto and from the Australian government to overturn the ban in association with trade negotiation talks that are on at the moment. So there's a lot that we're going to have to stand up for. If we want to keep Tasmania unique, we want to keep it clean, green and GE free, between now and the end of the year, it's going to be the time to talk up. It's going to be the time to talk to every political representative you can come across, no matter what their political colour or flavour, because we have to get them all behind us to maintain our GE free status. Thanks for coming along, and here's to a good push and hopefully success in staying GE free.